Hello. It's wonderful to be here, and just thank you all. 'Cause already, so many of you have come up to me and just said thank you, and it's great to meet you. And it's really reciprocated because I don't think it's often you find yourself in a room with so many like-minded people where you can actually say what you're thinking. And actually, I'm going to start by telling a personal anecdote back from 20, 30 years ago, and because Alan said when he told us about tonight, he said, it's about bravery, talk a little bit about bravery, and I think bravery has been more notable through its absence in part over the last 3 years and its presence. And I grew up in Manchester in the late 90s, and I was very lucky. I went to a nice private school, but it was in the middle of a really, really rough area. And one day I was 15 and we were on the tram coming home from school, and this gang of maybe 19, 20-year-olds got on the tram, and me and my mate were there in our little private school uniforms, and we were carrying lacrosse sticks, so really, really stuck out. And this gang of guys kind of came up to us and started kind of ribbing us and standing around us and, being really quite aggressive. And it was rush hour, and I remember looking at this really busy carriage and trying to get eye contact of people. Is someone going to help here? You can see the way this is going. And everyone else in the tram, all adults, looked down in their newspapers and pretended they hadn't seen and kind of, this wasn't happening. And then it got worse, and one of the guys came up to me and he pulled my hair back and he started saying in very graphic detail what he was going to do with my lacrosse stick and which body part he was about to stick it up, and still no one looked up. And then as I tried to fight back, because it was obviously a pretty hostile situation, he punched me, and he punched me so hard that my head hit the window in the carriage behind, and it broke the glass in the window. And even then, at this point, my mate is stood there going, "Help, help, can someone help us?" Even then, not a single person in that carriage looked up. And I can't pretend it really scarred me. The train pulled into a station, we called the police, everyone got off and shuffled off, a bit embarrassed. And, I probably hadn't even thought of that for 20, 25 years, but I did find that during 2020 and 21, I thought about it again, actually, and it occurred to me that I learned an awful lot in that episode about bravery, because bravery takes many forms, right? The pediatrician who comes out of retirement to give up her life, literally fighting for the great-grandchildren she will never meet. The politician, I don't know if he's still here, who week after week stands in an empty chamber being ostracized and excommunicated and doing the right thing because he knows it's the right thing to do. And the TV presenter who every day risks her livelihood saying what millions are thinking and no one is brave enough to voice. That is all bravery. But whatever form it takes, bravery is rarely silent. And we have seen far too much silence over the last few years. And I'm going to... And I guess I've taken some of the silences quite personally, and I'm going to give you a few examples, a couple I've not really talked about publicly, actually, but here goes. So, I think my first, induction into, the moral cowardice of our times was 2021 when, you don't regret, I think what Andrew said is right, you don't regret the fights you fight, and, we'd stood up by this point, we'd stood up for school closures, we'd stood up against masking kids, and I think these were campaigns that the mainstream press segments of got behind, and they were controversial, but they weren't the kind of thing that got you excommunicated. 2021, as I'm sure many people in this room also felt very acutely, that changed. It changed with the vaccine rollout for reasons that I still do not fully understand. I suspect it was part of a much bigger censorship operation that we are beginning to learn a bit more about. I think we're far from learning the full extent of it. So I was commissioned by the Telegraph to write about the kids' jabs. I was asked very specifically, make it as anti as you can, because clearly this is one of, I believe, the worst things to have happened in our lifetimes. Like, how can we be thinking about rolling out this product that children don't need? So I did that. And having written for the paper, often at their request, every week for a year by then, that was the last I ever heard from them. Never, even to this day, reply to an email. And, you're left feeling like you're hung out to dry and it's uncomfortable. And, there are many people, I know I'm not alone in being cancelled in this room, but it is nasty. The second example... The second one, which was far less about me, but probably the biggest blow, actually, of the last few years, is when we wrote the accountability deficit. My husband and I are both lawyers, and we spent a month, actually, about a year ago, going through all the records of minutes and all these committee meetings and kind of doing the job of the COVID inquiry for it. And we found that one of the committees there was this moral and ethical advisory group. Those of you that have read the book will know about this. Those of you that haven't probably won't, because one of the things we found, and we documented it, was that there had been this committee, and to cut quite a long and protracted story short, the committee started giving very hostile advice about government pandemic policy, particularly about the vaccine rollout. It was all there, it was all in meeting minutes, and they started kind of screaming like, this doesn't look right, certain elements, particularly the coercive elements, and particularly the rollout to children. And at the height of 2021, the group received instructions from senior officials, we don't know which from the minutes, but received instructions effectively to go on an extended sabbatical, and ended up being closed down. And as a lawyer, that looked like quite a big story. And, I remember reading this thinking, this just looks like serious evidence of wrongdoing, like kind of rubbing eyes. And we gave it to a few of the papers, and they agreed. And one of the papers actually said, this is front page news, and we were told it was going to go on the front page. And honestly, that moment when they said that, I was punching the wall, thinking, we got the bastards! We got the fucking bastards! Almost crying. But we didn't get the bastards, because that was the Sunday, and the pet story was meant to be running on the Monday, and it just never appeared. And we were never told why courage had been replaced with cowardice, why the silence, who pulled that, why was that not revealed to the public, I still don't know. And the third example, before I move on to a happier note, was actually more recently. So we did campaign mainly behind the scenes quite hard on the World Health Organization, I think like many of you sharing a concern about that. And we got a very strong legal opinion from a really, really senior lawyer to the effect that what the government were trying to do with the most recent, for those of you that have been following the pandemic treaty, and in particular the international health regulations, breached the law and they shouldn't do it. And we had this really great legal opinion. We took it to politicians. We had probably the biggest and most senior group of politicians back a letter. I think that letter would have killed the thing there and then. This was just a few weeks ago. The election the day after was called before we'd gone public, and one of the politicians said, oh no, we can't possibly go public. It would rock the boat too much. And we said, but if you don't go public, nothing will happen. This will go ahead. We will sign the IHRs, the moment will pass. No, we just can't. And I think at that point, I just thought, seriously? You're meant to, as Andrew said, act for us. How dare you? It's not your decision to make. And I guess where am I going with this? It's really important that our politicians and the public are brave, and that when they are, we are receptive to that and we embrace it. And I think too often, actually, on more mundane matters, when politicians do come up with innovative, bold policies, there is a tendency to sneer and laugh and kind of not take it seriously. And I think we're at a moment in time now where we really need the radical. And I guess it's an obvious point, but actually the point I want to end on is, it is clearly only when people are brave and when we're tolerant of those that are brave and courageous that we can hope to change public opinion. And actually, hopefully to give everyone in this room a little bit of faith that things are changing. So Us For Them commissioned some polling last week. which we haven't yet released to the public, and we got the results back just a couple of days ago. And it is quite interesting because the polling was all around lockdown-related issues, and we had this hunch that, like, this minority that we're all told we're in, you know, fringe maniacs, maybe weren't so fringe, and maybe, like, actually this is becoming more of a majority. And it turns out that we are, at least on some issues. So one of the questions that we asked was, would you be more likely to vote for a party that committed to an independent investigation into excess deaths? And rather unbelievably, that came back as bang on 50% of the whole population said yes. And if you exclude the over 65 age group, who obviously have slightly, or in some cases slightly different considerations, it's a pretty strong majority. And actually, I just think that's such a wonderful testament to, like, the power of everyone in this room, like what happens when we can all speak up together. And the piece of polling that I'm going to leave you with, because I think it's kind of important in framing where maybe we need to go next, is 60% of people said they were more likely to vote for a party that committed to holding senior ministers and officials accountable for serious wrongdoing during the pandemic. And just because I can't really be cancelled any more than I already have been, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Justice Jackson, who was the Chief Justice of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. And what he said in opening his remarks were, "The nature of the wrongs is such that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it could not withstand their being repeated." We are the majority, is what I will say.